You see, the whole country of the system is juxtapositioned by the hemoglobin in the atmosphere because you are a sophisticated rhetorician intoxicated by the exuberance of your own verbosity.
तुम लोग मुझे ढूंढ रहे हो और मैं तुम्हारा यहाँ इंतजार कर रहा हूँ। जब तक बैठने को न कहा जाए शराफत से खड़े रहो। ये पुलिस स्टेशन है, तुम्हारे बाप का घर नहीं।
जलता है ना? वो तो जलेगा ही।
ये दोस्ती हम नहीं तोड़ेंगे।
हम भी वो हैं जो कभी किसी के पीछे नहीं खड़े होते। जहाँ खड़े हो जाते हैं, लाइन वहीं से शुरू होती है।
डॉन को पकड़ना मुश्किल ही नहीं, नामुमकिन है।
These bloody gunda log, you be careful. They are bloody cockroach from Gadar.
खिड़की तो खोलिए, हमारी तारीफ जरा लंबी। बचपन से सर पे अल्लाह का हाथ और अल्लाह रखा है अपने साथ। बाजू पे 786 का है बिल्ला, 20 नंबर की बीड़ी पीता हूँ, काम करता हूँ कुली का और नाम है।
अभी अपन सोने को जाता है, नहीं? तुम भी जाओ, हम भी जाते हैं। गुड नाइट।
समंदर की लटों में चांदनी का गजरा,
पर्वतों की आंखों में बादलों का कजरा।
हिंदुस्तान की जान है ये रंग रूप चेहरा, संस्कृति का धनी है राज सुंदर सुनहरा।
धर्म यहाँ पे तो मेहमान नवाजी है, सबका दिलों से होता स्वागतम यहाँ।
अनंत है, अपार है, ये प्रांत नहीं ये प्राण है। जय 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 महाराष्ट्र मेरा, देखो प्यारा महाराष्ट्र मेरा।
महा है महाराष्ट्र।
There's only one man in India who can make your heart stop with just a syllable. There's only one man in India who has lived the internal life of an entire nation publicly on a cinema scope for over 30 years. There's only one man in India who, when he falls ill, everybody would stop eating and praying for. I don't need to say anything more about him because I see an absolute ocean of people here. And so please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Amitabh Bachchan.
Amitabh, I come and give it to you. Come. Okay, this is as big as it gets. And I can tell you, this whole thing will probably never again see this kind of star power, because not only do we have the one and only Amitabh Bachchan here, but coming in to listen to him, we also have with us today Robert De Niro. Robert. Is it? So well, I say this because, unfortunately, when we have Bob De Niro on stage, we will not have Amitabh Bachchan in the audience. And maybe it's appropriate that Robert De Niro visiting India should actually be here to see, by far, the greatest Indian film star in the history of Indian cinema. I was just talking to Jaya outside before we came in, and I said, the problem with talking to Amitabh Bachchan anywhere is that everybody seems to think they know everything about him. We seem to have lived all our lives with this larger-than-life figure Amitabh Bachchan on screen, dominating our lives all for 40 years now. At the same time, anybody who knows Amitabh from a distance, if anybody really knows him, closely, if anybody really knows him, also knows that there is a very, very private Amitabh Bachchan. And very little is known about this very private Amitabh Bachchan. And our task here today is going to be to see if we can get the private Amitabh Bachchan to talk to us a little, to deign to talk to us a little. Amitabh, let's just start with the beginning, because with you it's a useful thing to do, because your beginnings are actually very complex. You were born to one of India's great Hindi poets, Harivansh Rai Bachchan. You took a career path that was almost in total variance to your dad and his great eminence. Tell us a little bit about how you decided to actually pursue the idea of cinema at a time when cinema wasn't quite the thing it's become today. Today, it's this great career of choice for a lot of people coming from elite backgrounds. It has been for the last 20 years. But in the 1960s, I think 69, when you actually broke away from a boxwala's job, first of all, what were you doing in a boxwala's job? And having been there, how did you decide that movies is all that you wanted to do?
First, I'd like to thank you and thank for having me here, and the great honor of being in the presence of Mr. Robert De Niro. We've all been great admirers of yours, and it's such an honor and such a pleasure to have you. The atmosphere in the house and in the family was always one of literature and poetry because of my father's presence. And so, to answer your first part of the question, when I was being asked what I need to do, and many people used to ask my mother, you know, why has your son gone into films when your husband is a poet and a man of letters? She said, well, one poet in the family is enough. So, to answer the other part, you know, when we, in our time, when we were in college and university, way back in 1962, the obvious thing for most young men was to be a graduate. That was kind of peer pressure. And so our ultimate aim used to be to go to a university, get a graduation degree, and that seemed to be a landmark in the lives of most young men. But what do you do after you become a graduate? And that seemed to be a problem with all of us. And then somebody, after we tried many other places to get a job, and having failed, somebody said you should, you know, become a newsreader in All India Radio. So I applied for the job. I was rejected.
With your voice, you were rejected? With this?
Yeah. You'll have to ask All India Radio why they did that. I tried in Hindi as well, and I was a failure there as well. So then someone said, you know, Calcutta is the place where if you know how to have your gin and lime at lunch and can swing a golf club, you'll get a job. So I knew neither, but I still landed up there and fortunately got a job. And that's how I spent about 7 years in Calcutta. I then came across, through my brother, an advertisement in a paper, a film magazine actually, from Filmfare Madhuri, inviting applicants to come and do an interview for a possible role in film. This advertisement was given by 5 or 6 very prominent directors of the time, and I felt that this was perhaps a very legitimate way of getting into the film industry. I never knew any other way. And I applied for it, and I was rejected in the preliminaries there as well. So then I left my job, and I just landed up home and landed up in Mumbai with a driving license. And I said, if I don't get into movies, at least I can become a taxi driver.
I'll just stay with that seminal moments. Tell me, Amitabh, who was the greater influence on your life of what we know your father was a very charismatic poet whose mushairas were packed to the rafters. But your mum was also a very, very strong Punjabi woman with a mind of her own. Of your two parents, who was the one who actually influenced you more? And I also want to contextualize this a little more, trying to find this journey that you made from being a famous poet's son, but you were also part of India's reigning elite. If I'm not wrong, the great Jawaharlal Nehru, the Nehru family, were friends of your parents. So this was the kind of construct out of which you were emerging. One, which of your parents influenced you more, and what did they influence you in which ways?
I'd like to believe that I had a lovely mixture of the East and the West. My mother, more Western, because she came from a very affluent Sikh family. English nannies, expensive cars, and so on and so forth. My father was lower middle class, very poor. Lived in almost mud houses, studied in a kerosene lamp. And they just happened to meet very fortunately at a common friend's place, and within a couple of hours decided to get married. And that was, yeah.
Can I take a guess and say your mother proposed to your father?
No.
No, okay. that would be the Punjabi Sikh thing to do. Take the initiative. No, okay.
It was at a common friend's place, and late at night, as was the norm during those days, after dinner, the family and friends used to sit around and ask my father to recite some of his works. And during one of his recitations, he discovered my mother in tears, and that led to them coming together.
When you were growing up, what was the Sikh Punjabi influence in your life, Amitabh? Because the influence of your father in that sense is pretty clear. Your Hindi diction, your ease with Hindi.
No, my Punjabi is equally good.
It's pretty good?
Yeah.
Okay. But apart from that,
the other influence, of course, is perhaps my height.
Your height.
And yes, a kind of a very warm fighting spirit that is normally associated with the Sikhs. I also must say that in Allahabad, which is where I was born, which is in the heart of Uttar Pradesh, this was perhaps the first intercaste marriage of my father and my mother. And it was almost, yeah. Caste system was very prominent at that time. And
did it create an uproar,
the
marriage at the time?
It did indeed. And they were almost socially outcast because of the fact that they'd married out of caste. But as you rightly said, Jawaharlal Nehru and my father were, close friends. Panditji coming from Allahabad too. It was actually Sarojini Naidu, who was herself a very prominent poet and also a great politician and
a very inferior poet compared to your father.
Well, but she was, she was fighting for the freedom of the country. That's along right. With Panditji and so many others. And she was the one that introduced my father to Panditji, and a relationship formed after that. So the intercaste marriage and the almost social outcast that happened in Allahabad at that time was quite prevalent.
What language did you speak at home? English, Hindi or Punjabi? Or all three?
Actually, a bit of all three.
With Punjabi with your mom and English?
I used to hear her, but a lot of the Punjabi I spoke after I joined Delhi University.
Oh.
Because, yeah.
that kind of Punjabi everyone knows.
Yeah.
Oh, they want to hear some Punjabi from you.
Kithe baithe ho tusi?
Yeah, you went to Delhi University. Tell us a little bit about those college years before I come back to ask you about how your parents dealt with this idea of you entering cinema. Yeah. What was college like in Delhi at that point? Were they unremarkable years? Were you acting in theater then?
I was always interested in being on stage for some odd reason, and if I can remember correctly, right from the time when I was in kindergarten, I was always on stage. My very first role was that of a chicken with feathers, and subsequently every year I almost was on stage on a very amateur level. It was only when I went to Sherwood College in Nainital that we started doing important plays, Shakespeare and some of the more prominent writers and playwrights. In Calcutta, we joined a group called the Amateurs, which was always in competition with the Calcutta Dramatic Club, which was the British club. And at that point of time, even in '62, there was a lot of a differentiation between the British and the locals. And there were certain institutions where the Indians were not allowed to go. I remember the Calcutta swimming pool, where only British were allowed to come in there as members. And for a very long time, Indians were never allowed to join in as members. So we always had a very healthy competition between these two groups, and we did a lot of plays there. But they were all on a very amateur level. Is there any truth to the rumor or myth that Indira Gandhi put in a word to get you a break in your first film? I don't know. I keep hearing this all the time. I've yet to see that letter, and I've yet to see anyone that may have received that letter. So I personally feel that even a letter from God would not get you a role in a film. I would wish very much for Mr. De Niro to endorse that.
He said, I agree. De Niro says he agrees. Tell us about the first break, the first film.
It was the film called Saath Hindustani. It was made by Khwaja Ahmad Abbas. It was on the story of 7 Indians who went in to Goa, the place where we are at, to liberate it from the Portuguese. And it was a story which dealt with 7 Indians from different parts of the country. And Khwaja Ahmad Abbas being almost very socialist in his thinking, very secular, very committed to the principles laid down by Gandhiji, Pandit Nehru, and the earlier fighters for the freedom, chose artists from different parts of the country and made them play roles opposite to their own belief and their religion. So I, being a Hindu, was asked to play a Muslim. Utpal Dutt, who came from Bengal and was a Bengali, was asked to play a Sikh, and so on. And that was my first film. It was actually my brother, who was again, happened to be posted in Bombay at that time.
Ajitab.
Yes. He moved around with a group of friends where they came to know that Abbas Saab was making a film, looking for newcomers. He sent in my photograph. Abbas Saab seemed to like it. He called me over, he saw me, and that's how I got my first.
The film was an utter disaster.
Yeah, it didn't do well.
Then there was a film called Bombay to Goa.
That's right, yes.
Which also didn't do well. I had one memorable song.
Reasonably well.
Did reasonably well. Then there were another 4 or 5 films which did.
There were several films after that were just complete
So
disaster.
from 1969 to 73, we know those films. There were a whole slew of films which did abysmally, but you personally shone in all of them. Is that right?
You'll have to ask somebody else about this.
I
tried to do
I remember seeing a film called Parwana, which was also a flop, where Naveen Nischal was the hero and you were the villain. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That was a negative role, and actually we didn't much care about whether we were doing lead roles. The idea was just to do something or get some kind of a part to play in a film, just to be associated with cinema.
These 4 years, Amitabh, when you were willing to do almost any role that came your way, and these films were flopping one after the other, what was your state of mind? Did you think you'd made a mistake? Did your parents talk to you? Did they say, give this stuff up? It's not where you belong, come back?
No, my parents never told me anything, and I just stuck around. They were depressing. They were very depressing days because you always felt that there was some kind of an incapability within you, which was perhaps not making your films do the kind of wonders that other stars were getting attached to. But I just persisted, and I felt that
What was the silver lining in those years? Apart from Jaya Bahaduri, what was the silver lining?
Yeah, she and me did a film together with Rishikesh Mukherjee.
I'm going to talk about that later. That's my next question. Not Abhiman. You're not going to talk about Abhiman yet.
No. This is the film called Goody, where Jaya was the leading lady. Where is she? She's here somewhere. And she was just out of the Pune Film Institute. She was a gold medal winner. She was, the topper in the institute. And the film was designed after her. And Rishikesh Mukherjee asked me to play opposite her. And then I was removed from the film after working with her for about 10 or 12 days.
Well, why was that?
I was doing another film.
They couldn't fit you in the same frame.
No, apart from that. I was doing another film, fortunately, with another producer in the South. And suddenly I was doing a film with Rajesh Khanna, who was the ultimate god of stardom at that time, and in a film called Anand. And Anand, I think, released perhaps before Goody, if I'm not mistaken. And suddenly people started recognizing me, even though my role was very insignificant. But he felt that the character that needed to be played opposite Jaya in Goody had to be a new face, so he asked me to move away from the film, so I had to leave the film.
Anand was a film in which you first damaged Rajesh Khanna somewhat. There were a lot of comparisons which actually damaged Rajesh Khanna, I remember, in Anand.
No, I think that would be very unfair to say that. I think that, yeah.
We know from the lore of those days about how insecure Rajesh Khanna became after the success of Anand and the reviews that you drew.
No.
Your role in Goody finally went to Dharmendra, is that right?
No, it went to Samit Bhanja, an actor from Calcutta, a Bengali actor from Calcutta.
So I want to bring Amitabh to the watershed year in his career. The watershed year in his career is 1973. I first got to know Amitabh about 15, 16 years ago when I wrote a piece on him. And there only twice in my life, while I was in my early 30s, I met two men I admired hugely, and I was actually dumbstruck for a few minutes. One was V.S. Naipaul, whom I met in the mid-1990s, and I learned to write by reading him, and it was a moving experience for me. And the next was when Amitabh said, "Come and see me," at his house in Juhu. And that was my first insight into what made Amitabh in some sense, because my appointment hour was 11:15 at night. So I showed up at 11:15 at night, and he was already doing a couple of meetings, and I think after he finished with me, there was another couple of meetings lined up, and I just thought, my God, if you're going to be the greatest superstar in this country for the last 20 years and still work past 1 every night, you're in trouble. We spoke, and much later, I met a lot of people around him. I went to see him shoot. And then I wrote a piece on him where I actually picked the year 1973 as a crucial year in his career. He made two landmark films in 1973. That's the year Amitabh Bachchan, the great god of Indian cinema, was born. One was a film called Zanjeer, and the second was a film called Abhiman. They're two very different, he essayed two very different roles in that. And Zanjeer was what made him cast him into the type of the angry young man, which was then going to dominate Indian cinema for the next 7 years in a way that Indian cinema has never been dominated before or after. Many of those films were written, as we all know, by Salim Javed, Farhan's dad. I just want to ask Amitabh, there were two impulses at work at that time. There was Abhiman, which was a much quieter film, a very, very subtle film. And then there was a larger-than-life film like Zanjeer, melodramatic, action-filled. You had seemed to have then chosen one path, the Zanjeer route. Would I be fair in saying that that is been thereafter the real avatar of Amitabh Bachchan, always larger than life, always invulnerable, invincible. You know, very different from Abhiman, where you played a very sensitive character who keeps getting... Sorry, I'm sorry. I just want him to answer that. He refuses to answer that every time I ask him.
You know, firstly, it's very embarrassing sitting here and hearing all these lovely accolades coming your way. But I was just looking for another job. And it so happened that you mentioned Bombay to Goa. And Farhan Akhtar is here, whose father, Javed Saab, and Salim Saab, the two writer duos, who I believe have been the finest writers of Hindi film scripts in the entire history of the film industry. Some of their works have been absolutely phenomenal. And they came up to me along with director Prakash Mehra and said, we'd have a script and we'd like you to hear it. And I heard it and I liked it. Who wouldn't like any script that came your way at that point of time in your life? And I just agreed to do it. Several months after into the shooting of the film, I happened to ask Javed Saab, what was it that made you decide to take me? Because I was a newcomer, I was a failure, nobody was wanting to work with me. And he described and said, you know, there was a film of yours which you did called Bombay to Goa. And there was an action sequence in that where you get, you're in a restaurant, you get punched in the face, you roll over, you take a couple of somersaults, and when you get up, you're still chewing gum. And that was the time when we decided that you should be playing the role of Zanjeer. I have yet to find out why. Chewing gum could be associated with a role in Zanjeer. But that's how it all started. I also asked Salim Javed why they wrote those kind of scripts. And their explanation has always been that the country itself was going through a time when the people were not happy with the system. Things were going wrong. The emergency was just around the corner. And they perhaps felt that it was time for one individual to stand up and take on the system single-handedly. And most of their scripts that they wrote for me, fortunately, embodied this character, which is going to fight the system single-handedly and come out victorious in the end. And perhaps that identified with the youth, with the people of the nation at that point of time. And I was lucky enough to be standing on the bus stop when this script went by me.
Tell us a bit about the Abhiman experience also, that kind of role, which you're so good at. You did it in Saudagar too, yeah, something very similar.
When I was asked to get out of Goody, Abhiman came as a consolation prize from Hrishikesh Mukherjee. He said, don't worry, I'll do another film with you, but leave this one. So that was Abhiman. It was the story of two individuals who were both singers, and how the wife becomes a better singer than the male, the husband, and the conflict that arose there. Some of the music of that film has really been eternal. And the great S.D. Burman, who composed all those songs, was absolutely incredible. And I must say that during many of the sessions that we had, the music sittings that we had with Burman Dada, with all due respects, what we heard when he used to compose the music and sing it himself, you have not heard 25% of that even in the film. He was that great. And really the music of that film still works magic even now. But indeed the entire film and the story and its construct was so personal, so intimate, and perhaps reflected in the lives of many married people where the husband and wife have the same vocation and find that the wife is doing better than the male, In India, it is looked upon as a male-dominated society, which I don't agree with. And perhaps that is what, struck a very powerful point in the minds of the audience. And they just seemed to like it very much.
From 73 to 83, say or 82, let's say, about for 9 years, you reeled off hit after hit. I mean, it was insane. One after the other, Muqaddar Ka Sikandar, Trishul, Amar Akbar, Antony, they just go on one after the other. In those 9 years, when you had become this dominant megastar in this country, personally, what had your life become? Because I'm going to connect this back to the fact that there are a number of people who are great lovers of Guddi, the film, people in the 50s, who think you took Jaya Bahaduri away from them.
This is something that Jaya and me decided when we got married soon after the shooting of Guddi. And it was her decision to devote her time to bringing up the children and concentrate on looking after me and the family and the house. But there's always been freedom on her part to do what she wants to do, and she still works, and she's about to work again. And we worked after that once the children grew up and we all became grandparents. And she has the freedom to do.
Looking back, Amitabh, now, do you think she could have acted some more?
Oh, yes, I wish she does, because we did a few cameos recently in a Bhojpuri film, and I felt that she needed to do very much similar kind of roles in the years to come, and she should really work.
You did all kinds of roles, and one of your triumphs was that the most absurd scripts you could make plausible. I mean, you were given some really absurd scripts, which you made seem very plausible. What was the method by which you were picking your scripts?
Yeah, I'm bad at picking scripts. I just look at the opportunity of getting work. And everything that was done by the writers, the producers, and the directors. I just wanted to be sure that what I was delivering was acceptable, and that's all. I never really looked at what effect it would have at the box office, so how competition would work, or what it would happen, or what kind of impression it would create. I find that as a huge departure from what today's generation and the younger generation thinks. They are so organized, and they're so well planned. And I'm amazed at some of the talent that comes up in today's Hindi films. The very first appearance that they make in a film is just bang on. And I wonder because, I'm about 180 films old now, and I'm still trying to learn what I should need to do to improve myself. But these youngsters are all well planned, and I'm sure that Farhan will agree with me on this.
All this is being said without a trace of irony.
No, not at all. I genuinely believe that. I think that...
But you yourself, Amitabh, redefined the superstar and the idea of commitment and discipline. Because when you came on the scene, it was very normal for a film shoot that was meant to start at 6 o'clock in the morning to start at 3 in the afternoon because the star had drunk too much the night before, and crews would sit around for three shifts before the star showed up. And I want you to tell everybody here about your own experiences in coping with this when you were not the Amitabh Bachchan, but were co-starring with other stars.
Well, I just feel that if you made a commitment to a producer, and if he's given you a time to arrive, or anyone, I made sure that I left my room at 5 to 6 so that I could be here at 6:15 and get mic'd up. And if that is the commitment that is required, I will do it. But yes, there have been many colleagues who perhaps have felt that they could come at their own sweet time. But I've never really had a problem with that. I think that even though they are late, they stay late and finish the work for the day. So it makes up for the delay.
Did Shatrughan Sinha make you wait for 7 hours?
There are many such individuals that have, yes. So what do you do when you wait? You water the plants of the studio, you open the gates and stuff like that.
There's also this incredible preparation you actually put in before you go onto the set. Just tell us a bit about it. You have a script, often not a script, just an idea what you're supposed to do, which used to be the case once upon a time.
Actually, in the early years, there was hardly an opportunity to get a really bound script. It was only Salim Javed who, for the first time, in my reckoning, gave me a fully bound script, and nothing changed after that. And that was a relief, because you had something to prepare and something to read and go by. But most of the time, your scene was constructed while you were on set. And if you disagreed, they would shift the scene somewhere else. There is a studio in Mumbai called Chandivali Studios. And those who are familiar with studios in Mumbai will... This is an outdoor studio. It's really wild terrain. It has all kinds of trees and little broken huts and a few grass patches here and there, maybe a wall in some corner. And this used to be a joke. During the summer months, all the leading stars of the film industry would say, we should go to Kashmir and shoot, because this requires the beauty of the mountains and the snow and the lovely weather. So at any given point of time during the months of May, June, July, when it is the warmest all over the country, the entire film industry would migrate to Kashmir, and we would have at least 10 or 12 units shooting films there. But every time we got stuck with a scene in Kashmir, the assistant director would come up and say, "Sir, scene shifted to Chandivali Studio." And the entire unit, and this great studio, which has absolutely nothing on it, has been the venue for some of the greatest locations all over the world. And that's how, we used to work during those times. But now, of course, we have many more special effects, and you can be sitting here and be, given a backdrop of being in New York or something.
Amitabh, you've said this in the past, that you're really a director's actor, that at the end of the day, you don't have an idea of the film, but you absorb the director's idea, what he expects of you.
I think that it's important for you to leave the decision-making to one person. I'd like to listen to one person on set, and if he's the captain of the ship, I will do what he asks me to do, because he has the visual and the sense and the idea in his mind of what he wants to make. If you have a disagreement with him, have the disagreement during the time when he's narrating the script to you. Have all your arguments and discussions before that. But once you come on set, I think it's only very professional and ethical to follow what the director tells you to do.
And most of the directors in your halcyon years were just telling you, go out and blow the audiences out.
No, they never said that. They just said, do what I'm asking you to do, and I did it.
In those 8 or 9 years, from 73 to 82, just tell us a little bit of what your own favorite films are. Each of us here has many favorite films of yours. Tell us which are the ones that you look back and say, that was good, that wasn't bad, I did right with that.
I've always found it very difficult to describe each film, and while we were backstage and talking and you were asking me to be politically correct, I shall say that if I were to divide my career into the 4 different periods of, or let's say, generations or decades of my life, I would dedicate the first one to Khwaja Ahmad Abbas, who discovered and gave me the first role. I would include Salim Javed, who wrote the most magnificent scripts for me, Prakash Mehra, Manmohan Desai, Yash Chopra, who made some of the fantastic romantic films. And then moving on to the next generation and working with very superior talents like Tinu Anand and Mukul Anand. And all along this, while always having the opportunity, excuse me, to work with Hrishikesh Mukherjee, who was like a godfather to Jaya and me throughout my career. And whenever he asked us to come and do a film, we would drop everything and be there. And then we came to the next generation of Aditya Chopra and Karan Johar, and now we have the younger generation, and I'm enjoying this period of working with this new talent. It's a little odd for me to be on set these days because the average age on set is about 25 and I'm 71. So it's a little odd, but I just love the enthusiasm that this generation has. I love their determination, their confidence that they are going to make it and that they're going to prove to the world that they are the best. It's just very, very, very warm, very exhilarating to see this kind of an attitude on set. And I wish them all the very best.
How do you pick a film? How have you always picked a film? Is it the director or is it the script?
The role, actually, and what I'm going to be doing, if it's exciting enough for me to play that role, I would go for it. Yes, the director has to be someone whom I believe in. It's always helpful to work with someone that you've worked with before because there's a certain level of comfort. But even if it's a new director and the role is interesting enough, I would go ahead and do it.
So say Prakash Mehra comes to you and he wants to make Lavaris. What does he say to you? What is the film he's making?
Actually, after Zanjeer, I stopped asking him any questions. Every time he said, "You're working in my next film," I said, "Fine." And I would just land up, and those films would succeed, so I dare not question him.
Amitabh, your critics say, of which there are unfortunately too few, your critics say that for someone who's so incredibly intelligent, you made a choice of a lot of bad films. Would you agree with some of that?
Sure. I doubt if there's any actor in the entire world, with all due respects to Mr. De Niro, when they haven't gone ahead and done a film and it hasn't turned out to be, you know, the kind of film that they believed it would be, or it has been so incredibly bad that it's just kind of forgotten in their vision. Sometimes we do films because we believe in the person who's going to make it. Sometimes it's a gesture. Sometimes it's your own belief going wrong. We all make mistakes. And if they were mistakes, fine. But I will not deride any film that I have done. I will stay with every film that I have made. And I will say that I had a great time making them, irrespective of what happened at the box office.
You know, when you talk to younger directors, or even television, which you've done very successfully now in the last 11, 12 years, they're always astonished with the degree of preparation you come with before you enter the studio floor. Now, at what point does that preparation begin for you for any role?
Yeah. I think one of the greatest fears that perhaps I may not be alone in thinking like this is an appearance before an audience. And that's quite frightening. So even though I'm here today, I'm very fortunate that I cannot see 99% of you people because of these lights. It just gives me the feeling that I'm alone and I'm talking to myself and to Tarun here. But really it's the presence of a live audience that brings in this great fear. Fear not so much of what you're going to be doing in front of them. Fear of whether you're going to be acceptable to them or not. And two, whether you are not going to be making any mistakes in front of them. I think making a mistake in front of an audience is extremely embarrassing for an artist. And I just want to make sure that I don't make any mistakes. And I hope I'm not making any mistakes today.
There's a really rough period in your life, and there have been several. There was the time when you were struggling to succeed. Then there was a time when you almost died after the Coolie accident, and everybody prayed for you, the whole country prayed for you for weeks on end. And then there was this period in the 90s when everything tanked. You opened a commercial company, it didn't do well. And then there were a series of bad films. Tell us a little bit about your state of mind in these years when you went from being this really big megastar into this really sort of unhappy place.
Somebody advised me within the family that I didn't need to work anymore. And it's time that, you just relax, put your feet up and, rest. So I did that. And for about 3 or 4 years, I went around, I traveled a lot, didn't do any films, stayed in New York for about 2 years, went and bought my own grocery, cooked some really bad omelets for my breakfast on my own. It was really interesting to be able to drive your car, walk the streets, just do what you felt like doing.
You attempted the ordinary life.
I do it even now. I would do it even now. But I just felt that it was extremely liberating. But I think that perhaps taking that sabbatical was a grave error, a very big mistake. I think an artist needs to be involved, be working all the time. And when I returned to come back to Bombay and start working again, I just felt that a lot of water had flown and had, flown by, and the whole scenario had changed. There was fresh talent, there was new, popular youngsters that were now dominating the region, that people were not looking at you in the same vein, in the same way that they looked at you earlier. The kind of public response that the younger generation and the newer stars were getting was much greater than yours. When you entered a restaurant, fewer people turned around and looked at you, whereas if the youngest star moved in, he would get mobbed. And that's when you realize that there are limitations to an actor and his popularity as time goes by. And I think it's one of the most difficult decisions that any actor has to make, is the realization that you're no longer as popular as you were before. And there comes a time, and there will come a time in your life, in your career, when you will have to step back and allow that younger person to go ahead and just be content with what you have done. Either move away from the scene, but if you are wanting to continue, then you'll have to contend with the fact that there is somebody who is younger and better than you, who is now placed at a higher pedestal than you are. I felt that I needed to do work. I also went through a great a financial crisis because of the losses that my company made. I went bankrupt, and there were huge debts. There were huge loans that need to be repaid to banks. There were creditors on my doorstep every morning. They were rude, they were abusive, and I felt that that was something I did not want to tolerate. So I started working again. And I think those moments were very, very pertinent in my life, because I realized that you're not the person that's going to get pampered on set as you were before. You're not going to be given that kind of dignity and respect.
It's okay.
Is that for me to stop?
No, no. No, we don't stop. We're going on. We're going on.
That you are going to be treated much lower than what the other guy is going to be treated. And you have to accept that. But I just felt that continuing to work, being in that atmosphere was important for me, A, financially, but B, because I loved the job. And so I just continued to work. And gradually, things became better. There came a turning point where, mainly due to financial reasons, I got an offer from television to host KBC, which was the Hindi version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And I took that job, and And I felt that that was a savior in many respects, because suddenly it gave me an opportunity to interact with the people of the nation, with the common man, with people whom we knew existed in our country, but we'd never known their conditions. It was a great eye-opener for me, apart from the fact that it was a novel experience for me to be working on television. Everyone said that I was making the biggest mistake of my life by going into television, reducing myself from a 70mm screen onto a 25-inch TV screen. Felt was almost like reducing your stature to 25 inches of a TV screen. But there were compulsions, and I went ahead, and I'm now in the 12th year of KBC and done over.
Is it true that you said when you were offered Kaun Banega Crorepati that you would try it out for 30 days and see if it worked for you, and then only would you accept the offer to do the anchoring?
Yeah, my first reaction was, can I see how this program is produced? So Star TV took me to England, to the Elstree Studios, where Chris Tarrant, who was the original host and still is, was performing live. I saw that program, and I said, if you can give me the same production values in India, I'd be very happy to do it, and I'll just work for 3 months and nothing more. I never knew that I would last that long, and fortunately I have. So that was how it all began.
Because we are running low on time now, there are several tics and actions of yours on screen which are iconic. Generations have now grown up on them. The way you deliver your dialogues, the way you say "main" in a different way altogether. The way you run, and I know that the problem, it's very sexy the way you run, but I think it's because of a bad shoulder. And you're dancing, and you're dancing.
This is the first time I'm hearing that I look sexy when I run. You should have told me this before I got married.
And the way you dance, Amitabh, and the way you dance. And I know that you said this there, the inspiration for that great first step which you should do before you leave, came from Bhagwan.
Actually, a lot of people thought that was that. But this is a very ordinary step that most of us do.
It's ordinary because everybody's been following you.
It's a 1, 2, 3 step in Indian folk dancing, and almost everyone does it.
Nobody does it quite like you.
Yeah, sure. No, really.
So I just want to ask you, in cinema, who were your own influences from whom you were sucking? Who were your own models and stars when you were coming into cinema?
There were a few in Hindi cinema. Dilip Kumar Saab, and I've always admired him. I still do. I always have felt that he changed the way, well, actors need to perform in film. And if ever the history of Indian cinema will be written, it will always be before Dilip Kumar and after Dilip Kumar. In the Western world, one of the people that I've admired is fortunately here in the audience, Mr. Robert De Niro. And I've admired Marlon Brando, Al Pacino, Montgomery Clift. These are some of the people that I was greatly influenced by.
You did a very tiny role in The Great Gatsby. Most of us who are diehard admirers of yours thought it wasn't worthy of you, because we thought he's actually a greater actor than anybody else even in the West. Why would he do a small role like that?
Yeah, but tell that to Baz Luhrmann. No, Baz Luhrmann was on a private visit to India. He was on a motorcycle. He was going all over the country with a friend of his, and just called one fine day to my office and said he would like to meet me. And he dropped by. He spoke about India. He spoke about motorcycling through the various cities of the country. He talked about painting that his friend did. Not a word about film or acting or anything, and just left. About a year and a half later, he called again and said, you know, I'm making Gatsby, And I have a small role, and I'll be very happy if you can do it. I know it's not big enough for you, but I just feel that I'll be very happy if you did it. So I just did it as a friendly gesture rather than an opportunity to get to work in a Hollywood film.
Is there an Amitabh Bachchan who's not an actor, whether as a father, husband, father-in-law, grandfather, or are you always an actor, always? I ask you this question because there are great artists who are always who they are, either writers or actors. Do you ever stop acting?
Can we ask Mr. De Niro to answer this question? I really don't know. Some of the moments that we go through while we're performing in front of a camera, we try to delve deep within us. Let us say, for example, if there's a death scene and your mother has died in the film, and you have to emote. How do you behave? How do you bring out that emotion? And I don't know about the others, but you always seem to relate to it something personal. So you imagine that your own mother has passed away, and then you build yourself up into that moment. And because India makes the largest number of movies in the world, there are at least 10 times when my mother has died. And this is a dilemma for me, because I have just one mother, and I don't know where to draw the inspiration from. But that's the lighter side of it. I also feel that having expressed myself about 10 times on the death of a relative, when, God forbid, we will actually lose that relative in our real life, the emotions that come, the tears that we shed, where are they coming from? Or have I really exhausted all that reality in performing that role about 10 years ago? And that's always been a great dilemma. So when I lost my father and my mother, quite honestly, I really do not know the tears that came out, or the emotion that I felt, whether I was doing another performance or was it something that I'd already dealt with earlier on in some of my films.
We are running out of time altogether now. They want some more. He'll be there. Do you want him to come? Bob, would you like to just come up on stage for a minute? I'll go and get him. You wait here. I'll go and get him. Bob, come. This is... Bob, give a chair next to him, next to Amitabh.
Yeah, that's all right. I'll be there.
You can sit here. Yeah, come forward. Amitabh, sit. So you're going to get a full 3-meal course of Robert De Niro on Sunday. But this is just a great impromptu moment, one of the moments Think lives for. I just want to say here, since we are Indian, I just want to say it, Bob, Amitabh Bachchan is not just the greatest star in the history of Indian cinema, he's also our greatest actor ever. And he has...
Don't believe a word of what he said.
And whether it's comedy, action, melodrama, He's done it all with the most consummate skill that you've ever seen. If it's ever failed, it's mostly because the directors know because of him. He's truly one of our, he is the greatest actor we've ever had. And we're delighted that you had a chance to get both of you on the stage together. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Amitabh Bachchan, Robert De Niro. Can we have a standing ovation? Come, Bob. Thanks for coming up. Amitabh, thank you so much. Come.
Yeah.
Come. We'll do this outside. Just otherwise it'll create a stampede here. Come. They were fantastic. Well done. Come. Bob, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We have Remo Fernandez performing outside, and we'll see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock again at the hall. Thank you very much.